It's time to start rallying around America's young conservatives and explore what it means to be a young Republican in the 21st century. In a world where it seems like everyone under 30 must be a liberal, these are the stories you haven't heard before from the voices of America's young conservatives. So let's find out what it truly means to be raised right. Okay, so we are here with James Dunn, who runs the Dunn Right Podcast and who also is a really good friend of mine who works at Turning Point USA. Invited me in for an interview on his show, which I really loved. It was one of my favorites from all of the things that I got to do during my lawsuit. So I knew I had to reciprocate that and have him here on the Raised Right show when I got this thing off the ground. So James, welcome. I'm excited to talk with you again.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad that you're out here doing, journalistic stuff outside of ASU now. So I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, it's been good. I always say what happened was a blessing in disguise because it gave me the opportunity to really reach out and do the journalism that I wanted to do and not have to play so nice and mainstream and, get to do what I went to journalism school to do. So
It's nice being your own boss too, right? Getting to cover
Yeah.
the stories that you want to cover and not have to worry about it. Yeah.
It's a good time for sure. So why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about you and who you are and how you got involved in Turning Point and what being a young conservative's like.
Yeah, so my journey is a little crazy. I started out when I was a nerd, so I started out in politics when I was like 13 years old. Volunteered on the McCain campaign back in the day, so to date me a little bit. Worked on that and ended up getting an internship with a congressman when I was like 15, 16, and just was really involved with politics when I was younger. I got to about 18 years old, and nobody hires an 18-year-old staffer. So looked to find a way to serve in a different way. And I ended up joining the military right out of high school when I was 17. Was in the Air Force as a firefighter for about 7 years and deployed a couple times. It was pretty fun. Got out of the military, ended up working for Arizona Republican Party, ended up being an EMT, ended up doing this long journey that got me to Turning Point USA. And I'm happy to be there now. And now we're running the Dunn Right Podcast and kind of doing something a little bit similar than you. We're a little bit more raunchy, but yeah, we're out here just showing conservatives and showing we're normal people again as well. So
Right. Speaking truth.
Absolutely.
That's great. So 13, that's really young to start getting involved in politics. What was the spark for it for you to want to get involved so young?
So what was crazy was when I was younger, during Bush's second term, when he was running against John Kerry, I had a reading teacher that was giving us extra credit for volunteering on a political campaign. She didn't really care who it was for, and this is long before things were as bad. They used to be pretty liberal when I was younger, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it was. So I ended up volunteering on the Bush campaign, and we found a guy who was running for city council. He was a cop, nice guy. His name was Tom Wagner. Was running against a guy who'd been the city councilman for like 30 years. No one had ever ran against him or anything like that. Pretty corrupt guy, I think. And I'm from Las Vegas, so when I was a teenager, we still had corrupt politics and people bribes and things like that. All that Chicago style politics that you were talking about, or you've heard about probably.
Right.
Yeah, and so I ended up volunteering on his campaign. Just got to really know him. We lost the election by 7 votes. Yeah, and so it crushed me a little bit. But just to see like the impact that we made on our community, that just our small little city council ward, we ended up getting I think it was like 600 people registered to vote. We increased the voter turnout by like 200% in our city. And we got to, at least bring light to some issues that I think that were being not addressed very well in our city. And to be, 13 years old and be able to see an impact that you're having on your community it's really awesome. And it's like, well, if this amount of work on the weekends is going to do it, what happens if I just keep doing it now that I know what I'm doing? So I kind of got addicted. I got picked up by an assembly campaign, and then I got picked up by a congressional campaign. I ended up working on the McCain campaign and just moved on and on from there. So it was, it was a crazy journey, but that's, I'm just kind of a nerd. Some people have video games. Some people have, Dungeons and Dragons. For me, it was politics. So
That's awesome. Nothing wrong with that. We need more young people that like politics. 'Cause I think a lot of people shy away from it. Are like, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And we're really excited to be able to do that type of work. So I like this story about how you got involved with Turning Point. I think it's really cool how they kind of picked you up and brought you in. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do for them?
Oh yeah, so I work in their distribution department. So a lot of what I do is we have activism kits that go out to hundreds and now thousands of chapters across the United States, where we're empowering young women and adults to um, basically get out into their community, get out into their school, and teach other people about conservative values. Have those difficult conversations through tabling, and bring back normal conversation about politics and talk about differencing of opinions. And so we help facilitate that with creating things for events, or creating activism kits or banners or posters or everything that you see that has the Turning Point logo on it. Basically, that's a physical in your hand is something that we create there. And it's awesome because we create almost everything in house. Everything you see from the Turning Point store, everything. So, it's cool because, and one of my cheesy things that I always like to tell people is, you never know, I helped make a flyer or a poster that gets in the hands of somebody who ends up becoming a Supreme Court justice or the president or a congressman or whatever. You never know what might happen. It might be that one thing that starts that conversation with somebody. And didn't to get, I've gotten a couple of messages from people that are just like, yeah, I saw a button on a table at a campus, and it sparked a conversation, and it's changed my life ever since. And so to have an impact like that is really awesome.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Why do you think it's so important to kind of have those conversations and to spark them and to get out there on college campuses and really promote this idea of young conservatism?
So for me, I ended up going to college later in my life. I joined the military and then ended up being a 26-year-old freshman. So for me, it was like I had already been exposed to the real world. I had been exposed to liberal people, especially the liberal nastiness, working in politics as a younger person. So I knew some of the phrases and key ideologies to look for. And I think right now in our system of higher education, there's an echo chamber, and a culture that is benefiting from these liberal policies that a lot of these people don't leave the educational system, the academia, and
Mhm.
you're only getting one side of the argument a majority of the time. An example I always like to make is like Egyptian studies. If you're an Egyptian studies student, there's not really a market for that outside of academia. So you ended up becoming a professor to teach other students about Egyptian studies, to pay off your student loans. And it is literally a pyramid scheme um, of people just, bouncing ideas off of each other that haven't seen anything in the real world. And now you're starting to see it with Joe Biden nowadays, where these people are now finally getting to put into implementation with no fight back of what's going on. And our country is a result of that right now. Our border crisis is terrible. Gas prices are going through the roof, and everybody who thought these liberal policies are going to work are quickly regretting it. So I think it's just really important for us to have those conversations, so that people understand like the cause and effect of these liberal policies, and that we're just only starting to see the tip of the iceberg of this stuff. And if we don't fight back, we're not going to have a lot of country left.
Right. Yeah, it's scary, definitely. And I like that you bring that up because there's, this idea that really keeps me in check as someone who actually likes school but is a young conservative and kind of has to balance that. It's this idea of the ivory tower and the people that just stay, like you mentioned, in the education system their whole life and they never get out and talk with people that have been, in the quote unquote real world and never step out of that ivory tower to understand what's happening in the world around them. So for young people in college, as someone who's been through that, both the education system and the real world, what would be your words of advice for them to make sure that they, get their education but still stay in touch with reality?
So for me, it's just go in and do your own research. Don't take anything at face value. I had a professor at University of Arizona who was extremely against first responders, and whether it was a police officer, firefighter, EMTs, just really wrong. And if I hadn't had that prior life experience, I probably wouldn't have known anything about it and how wrong she was about the situation. And I think that sometimes you just have to go out and do your own research. I mean, it's the same thing with anything in life, from education to where you work to where you go to church. Don't take everything that everybody tells you at face value. I have a pastor, Pastor Mark Driscoll, who says that if you agree with me in 100% of the time, you're worshiping me and you're not worshiping Christ, right? So like there's a lot of things that you should be able to agree with everybody on a majority of issues, but go out there and do your research and be grounded in it and know why, not only know the information but why it is that way, because I think too many people get caught up in the parroting of information and not realize why it is that way. Like, for example, we're seeing a lot of that with Black Lives Matter right now, where they'll parrot these most mass shootings have been caused by white guys with AR-15s. And then you're like, well, yeah, if you take this very narrow specific thing, yes, 201 deaths have been caused by white guys with AR-15s, but black on black crime, gang shootings equate for 97% of mass shootings. And so it's like things like that where you're like, okay, well, we need to like dig into it, question things, get to the bottom of it, because we can't just take everything at face value, especially now the media doesn't care about that.
Right, right. So if we can't depend on media, and we can't depend on education to teach us these things, we need to branch out and find it for ourselves. What are some resources that you found helpful or know of now that you would recommend for people to get that information?
Honestly, it's hard, and I think that's a big reason why I started my podcast. I think it's a big reason why you've started yours. Is when I was looking for independent, unbiased media, I can't find it, and you got to go out there and you're gonna have to read primary sources, and it's not fun. It's not great, but it's the only way that you're going to get the true information without the spin. In this 24-hour news cycle, there's an incentive for things to be sensationalized and drive clicks and drive outrage and drive viewership over to the media. And I think a lot of people aren't realizing that there is a lot more to the story that they can fit within an hour or 30 minutes, especially within an hour segment. You're only probably going to be able to cover something for 10 to 15 minutes at most, with commercial breaks. So there's a lot more to that than that 10 to 15 minute narrative. And you have to go out there and look for the information yourself. The George Floyd case is a prime example of that. If you're not going through and looking through these primary source documents, you're not getting any of the story right now from any of the networks, to include Fox News. So a lot of these a journalist is really good at writing. A journalist is good at investigating, but sometimes they're not good at reading an autopsy, or they're not good at reading financial documents. And so sometimes you have to go in there and figure it out yourself. So just go seek the primary sources. And my thing is I like to read both sides. So if you go on my Twitter account, most of the accounts that I follow are liberal leaning. And I find out what the argument is, and then I go see if I can disprove it. So that's another strategy I use.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important to really understand why you believe and stand behind the ideas that you do.
Honestly, it's a risk. It's a risk reward thing. I had a professor who's extremely liberal, Professor Wilkinson, at University of Arizona, and I don't say his name because I want you to go after him. He's actually one of the best professors that I've ever had in my life. I did not agree with him on any of the topics, but he was very. Some of the professors, you just got to feel it out. When it became to left leaning issues, he would say his piece, and then he would immediately call on James Dunn to give the conservative perspective on it. So I say do it respectfully. If you're going to call out a professor, do it respectfully. I think that's the biggest problem that we're having in our narrative right now, is that too many people are trying to score political points and virtue signal and try and say, oh, you're a bad person. I don't think everybody that's a liberal is a bad person. We just don't disagree on certain issues, and you can't come to the table not in good faith. If you did that as a journalist, like 60 Minutes just did, they just got caught doing that. It becomes very apparent to everybody. So, and you'll lose a lot of people that way too. And we're seeing that a lot with the left, of this virtue signaling of, okay, if you don't agree with us, then that makes you a bad person. And how many people they're losing from listening to their message because of that, because they can't agree with them 100% of the time. So I think the best thing that we do as conservatives is go, hey, listen, we might not agree on everything, but if we agree on most things, you can be over on our side. Like, hey, I might not agree on transgender issues or whatever, but if you agree with small taxes, small government, making sure that we're not in foreign wars, making sure that, we protect our Second Amendment rights, we can both be conservatives at the end of the day and vote for the same guy. So I think a lot of that too is just knowing when to pick your battles. And it's going to be like that in real life. I think some people just think, oh, well, it's just like that for professors. You're going to have bosses that are liberal too. I had a boss that when I was a bartender was extremely liberal, and she knew I was conservative, and she knew my second job was working for the Arizona Republican Party, and she wasn't very fond of it. So I knew that in that workplace, that's not something that I should bring up. At that school, you're paying and you're choosing to go to that school and you're choosing to take that class. So you also have to respect that person because you are paying and you are asking for the advice of this professor. So if you're overly concerned about what you're getting at your school, don't go to that school. I think another thing that people don't bring up that often is as somebody who's employed people myself, I employed 192 people at Engage Texas. I've never looked once at the top part of your degree on a resume. I don't care if you went to University of Alabama or Harvard University or University of Phoenix. As long as you have a degree, majority of employers, especially in this market, are going to be looking at it that way. So I think that's another thing too, is pick your school wisely.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something we have to consider nowadays as young conservatives in this type of field.
No, absolutely. Well, to kind of piggyback on that, it's like, well, there's no incentive for these liberal institutions to change if you're a conservative, you continue to give money to them, right? So like if you continue to patriate these businesses, and that's a big thing that Charlie Kirk is somebody I respect often, is that they're working on, defunding all these universities and stop these big conservative donors from giving back to their alma maters who are treating conservatives like dirt on their campuses. If you're an older conservative and you still donate to campuses that are treating conservatives like that, stop. If you stop sending your kid does not have to go to the same school as you. And we're riding too much on tradition lately, and these colleges know that, and that's another reason why they feel like they can get away with it.
Right, absolutely. I mean, that's a really big point that we wanted to bring up with my case is that, hey, this is what's going on behind closed doors of one of the biggest institutions in America. And this is how conservative students are being treated. And it's not easy, but you really have to stand up and kind of rally the troops, so to speak, of raising awareness to these issues. And also, like you mentioned before, really educate yourself on what's going on, because a lot of this information is public record. It's easy to pull it up and look it up, and you don't have to depend so much on the media or someone else to tell you how to think. And I love what Charlie said. You don't necessarily need to have a degree, but you need to go, if you're going to get a degree, to develop a skill. You have to have a skill set that makes you unique and applicable to what you want to do. And so I think, like you said, there's a lot of pressure for people that feel like they have to go to college and they have to go where their parents went or where their lineage is from, and it's not the case anymore. It's a new world.
Yeah, well, to piggyback on Charlie's point, there's been so many people that I know that have been extremely successful without a degree. Elon Musk says that I never went to Harvard, but the people who work for me did. So there's a lot of people that can be out there and be entrepreneurs and do things. I think people put too much on the price of college. I've been extremely successful, and not to be egotistical, for somebody who has never gotten a degree in political science to have gone so far. And sometimes I tell people, why not take it? It would be easier to take a $40,000 loan, take 2 years off, and go work for somebody for free and get some true knowledge and working of how things are, and a pathway into an actual job with actual experience that's going to make you more marketable than sometimes taking 4 years and spending $140,000 in debt for a degree that's not going to get you where you want to be. So often I meet people my age, I'm 28 years old, almost 29 years old, that have degrees that in jobs that have nothing to do with their degree. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, we see that a lot. I mean, people go for one thing and then end up doing something way different than what was intended. So make sure you're passionate about it, whatever it is. So what's next for you? What's on the bucket list for James Dunn?
Honestly, right now, my big thing right now is I've been trying to ramp up our podcast a lot more. it's something that's been a passion of mine, and I know it's a passion of yours, is journalism and making sure that we're having honest journalism. I feel like there's not a lot of that going on at all. Even from the conservative media, I feel like everybody's taking time off, and things are going very terribly in our country, and no one's covering it, and no one seems to want to cover it, because no one wants to rock the boat, and everybody wants to get back to business as usual as it was. And for some of your listeners who might be a little younger and might not remember the Bush administration, but the whole reason why our presidency was so transformational was because a lot more people paid attention to politics. A lot more people knew what was going on. A lot more people, like, for lack of a better word, care about what's going on. And so I think with what we need to do now is I'm out there, trying to find stories, out there trying to find what's going on, because it's hard for me to believe that there's no news going on when there's a border crisis, or there's no news going on in the middle of a pandemic of whatever is going on, or there's no news that's going on when you're having state legislatures pass like momentous legislation. Like Arizona just recently passed a bill that will ban federal gun legislation, and that's not getting any coverage in the media. Or Arkansas is barely getting any coverage in the media about their transgender children bill. So there's a lot of things that are out there. Like your story, for example, of what was happening at ASU. I wouldn't have seen that if we didn't have our eyes and ears on the ground. And you were 10 minutes away from my home. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on, and people aren't seeking it out. So a lot of what we're trying to do right now is go out there and be a media source that's, although I am conservative, and I'm not hiding it. I'm trying to get you the news of what's going on. So yeah, that's what's on my bucket list right now.
That's great. I love it. There are so many stories out there that the mainstream media just doesn't pick up and doesn't talk about. And that's, one of the quotes that I love is that every walking person is a story. Everyone has a story, and everyone, wants to share their beliefs. And I think especially the demographic of young conservatives have missed that opportunity more than anybody else. So that's why I love to do my podcast and just talk to people, and get their thoughts and their stories and their background and share their passions. And I know you started a new page that's promoting businesses across Arizona that aren't enforcing their mask mandate. I love that. I think that's a great way to, kind of rally some conservative support. So how's that been going?
Crazily good. So it started on a whim. And for me, it's just something I've been obviously I'm wearing the small business hat, but I am very passionate about trying to help small businesses, small conservative businesses in general, out, because I feel like the left gets to promote Nike and Amazon and all these major corporations while mom and pop shops are closing across the country, and that, no one's out there looking out for them. And we don't know if another stimulus check is going to come out. We don't know if another PPE is going. And meanwhile, every single day, small businesses are closing while Amazon is adding, billions of net worth to them. So a lot of what we've been doing is at AZ, Patriot Biz. It's on Instagram. We've just been highlighting conservative businesses, maskless businesses, and letting people know, hey, this is where we're going to shop. And the next step of that is we're going to try and do meetups there. So we're going to have, people in the general area. We're going to bring voter registration forms. We're going to, bring candidates to these meetups. We're going to bring grassroots efforts back to Arizona. I think the biggest thing that we've been lacking lately is that Donald Trump's not here and we don't get our tweets. And
Right.
People scattered after the Capitol riots, and everyone's been super scared to meet together, and not because they're afraid of being labeled a domestic terrorist. So I think
Yeah.
the biggest issue is we got to bring back our grassroots efforts, and we can't sit back and let Joe Biden screw everything up and then just think that we're just gonna win in 2022. So
Yeah.
that's the other part of it too, is not only promoting but building grassroots as well. So
That's great. I love that. I feel like Arizona's split. There's like the people that are just ready for life to be back to normal and just get rid of the mask and forget it. And then there's a group that's like, don't change anything, leave the masks on, like keep everything the same. And it's a weird divide.
So what's weird for me with Arizona is even the Democrats are very anti-government. So like
Yeah.
Arizona in general just has this very anti-government vibe. Even Kristen Sinema, who's a far left Democrat, ran on a campaign of, we need, sometimes we need government help, but we're very skeptical of what the government does. And so I think it's the attitude of most Arizonans that are here. We're not really seeing that from the Californians that are moving here, but a majority of Arizonans who's been here for a long time, that's their motto. And I think you start to know who the mass people are when you ask them where they're from. So they're like, "Hey, where are you from?" "Oh, you're from California." And you're wearing a mask. That makes sense, right? Like,
That makes
but if
sense.
born and raised in Phoenix or born and raised in Tucson, yeah. So especially, go Wildcats. So I had to put that on your podcast.
No, do it. You know my feelings with ASU right now, so say all you want.
No, they haven't
So
necessarily been on my good list either. So
yeah, it's crazy, crazy. I never ever expected that my college career would end up going that way. But at the same time, I'm so grateful to God that it did because, like I said, it put me in the direction that I always wanted to go. So blessing in disguise.
well, what I don't understand about Arizona State University is it's in the heart of the fifth most populous county in the country. That's relatively has been conservative for years,
Mhm.
and they have a history of honoring veterans. Their biggest program on their campus is the Pat Tillman Foundation, and doing a lot of stuff with Pat Tillman. And so, how that university is so liberal makes zero sense to me, especially considering what the surrounding community is. And the people who send their kids to ASU are generally rich kids from California with parents that are conservative. So I don't know what's been going on with ASU. It was the first school I applied to and got into, and I was like, "Ooh, dodge that bullet." So,
Yeah, seriously. That's funny. So you've obviously been, very successful in the political realm for all the things that you've done. So what would be your advice to younger conservatives out there who want to get involved but aren't really sure on the steps to take?
so I'm gonna borrow. I know I've quoted him a lot, but I'm gonna borrow his advice, Charlie, because this is my success story. So go find somebody that you really like and go ask to work for free. Um, a lot of people are in this world of instant gratification that everything needs to come today and everything needs to happen right now. And that's not always going to happen. And politics is a crazy game. What you learn, if you're going to school for politics, you're going to throw out literally everything that you're going to learn from college, because none of it's going to apply. You're talking to real world people. Everything changes on a dime every day, from voter registration to the law to demographics to how districts are split and how the demographics of that district. So the best thing you can do is just go find somebody, ask them, "Hey, can I help you and work for free?" And you're gonna get coffee, and you're gonna take out trashes, and you're gonna sweep, and you're gonna mop, and you're gonna do some not fun stuff. But the best advice I can do is humble yourself and take a step backward, to take a step forward. And for me at Engaged, I was at Engaged Texas. I was a regional manager. I was in charge of 192 employees, but then I took a step back and went to Turning Point at a lower position, because obviously the people that are doing things at Turning Point at a national level are doing such phenomenal things that sometimes you got to take a back step forward in a bigger organization to understand that sometimes there's a better way of doing things, or there's a better way of whatever. So don't be afraid to take a step back, go work, go find somebody you want to work for and where you want to be, and go ask them, and go find a mentor. You'd be surprised how many old people want to mentor you and be out there and want the help. um, just my church, for example, I was like, "Hey, I really want to learn production stuff, and I want to learn how to do audio, video, and all that stuff." They're like, please come here and help us." So you never know. Just go out there and ask to work for free, and volunteer. And oftentimes it's only going to last 6 to 7 months. So go out there and volunteer. Instead of taking an internship at some kooky little thing, go take an internship at some place that's probably not going to be as fun, but it'll be more rewarding in the long run.
Absolutely. I love that. I think it's great advice for sure. So final question, what does being raised right mean to James Dunn?
Um, being raised right. So I grew up in I guess a culture of immigrants. My family is third generation immigrants, from Italy. They were entrepreneurs. They came here in the most stereotypical fashion and came to New York and opened up a pizza company. And knowing what America is, I guess, and what its values are, and what the opportunities are for people here in America, is what knowing is right, and working hard and having those ethics of honor, integrity, and a good work ethic, and just being raised right on good American values. I know I hate to define the term in it, but knowing your American values and sticking to them, and knowing what got you to the place you are. I think too many people get lost in the crazy stuff of racial injustice and all this crazy stuff, and they don't look at how well things are in America, and they get so lost in the negatives. And I think for me, if you go out there looking for all the negatives in America, you're going to find them. And if you go out there looking for all the positives in America, you're going to find them as well. And as somebody who's served this country, I've been to some of the not so great places in the world, where women don't have it as well, or minorities don't have it as well, whereas people who have a different religion don't have it as well, or immigrants don't have it as well. And if you go and to those other countries, you're going to see how great America is, and what a land of opportunity that we have here. And that raising your kids right and being raised right is understanding that and protecting what we have here.
I love it. Really great. Well, thank you, James. I appreciate it so much. It was great to catch up with you again, and hope to have you on in the future. Enjoy this episode of Raised Right? Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app to catch the next episode. And be sure to like and follow us on Instagram at Raised Right Podcast, and Facebook and Twitter at Raised Right Pod.